live from St. Petersburg, Russia, with David and Laura from San Francisco. So, what were your opinions overall on the Summer Garden, the Field of Mars, and as you saw yesterday, the Church of Christ the Savior on Spilled Blood?
Go ahead.
The Summer Gardens was, it did strike me as kind of having a bit of a European plan, kind of similar to gardens I'd seen in Vienna or Paris. Um, but what was interesting about it was the fact that there were these turnstiles you had to go through to enter and exit the park. I thought that was a little unusual. And the fact that you really couldn't deviate from the pathways due to the fencing. I mean, I mean, it was a beautiful park. Obviously, a lot of thought and care went into its restoration.
So, was it like going through a maze, a place to get lost, sort of,
Um, I don't know if I could see myself getting lost there,
in a
uh,
good way?
in a good way.
A place
uh,
to escape.
yeah, I mean, it definitely felt kind of like a escape from the urban environment, in much the way like Central Park feels, or other parks.
Yeah, I definitely saw the European influence in the Summer Garden. I think once we stumbled upon the first fountain, I was like, someone's jealous of Versailles, like in the planning of the
Right.
garden. Because I don't know, around that time period, that was the place to model yourself after. So definitely saw that influence. I love that it was in the center of the city, whereas Versailles, you have to kind of leave the city. And so I thought it was an amazing escape for people, current day that can take advantage of the park and be right there in the middle. Field of Mars, I was it wasn't really plant. It was kind of opposite, I guess, from the Summer Garden, in that it was just kind of an open space that had always been an open space and was logically used for drilling purposes. And now people just kind of sit out in the sun and chill out. There wasn't much to guide you as there was in the Summer Garden, kind of pathways and statues to look at and kind of things to attract your eye, whereas it's just kind of an open space. So um, yeah, kind of less of an attraction or things to see there. I'm trying to think of anything else.
Oh, and then the Church of the Savior
Oh
Spilled
yeah.
Blood. It's a beautiful space, a beautiful church. The mosaics reminded me a bit of St. Peter's. Kind of just the fact that they were so intricate and so massive. Um, I don't know. I mean, I don't know as much about the Russian Orthodox religion, so like it didn't really resonate with me in like a personal way, the way St. Peter's did, because I grew up Catholic. Um, but I mean, I thought it was a really beautiful and fascinating example of architecture.
Yeah, I think I said when we were there, um, and then someone pointed out today that it was built in kind of an older style. I was surprised, when you look at the dates, it was actually built. And it also seemed to draw from some of the architecture I've seen in books so far about Russian architecture that I don't see in this city,
So
except for that.
it was kind of a surprise to see it was kind of a surprise for you to see a Muscovite type cathedral in St. Petersburg, which is so Western looking.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's the right word, like the mushroom domes, I
Right,
think,
right.
that I expect to see in Moscow. That was really the only example of it here, and yet I've seen it splashed on the covers of guidebooks, and I'd be really
Right, right,
feel like misled if I came here,
right,
not on our
right,
guidebook,
right.
but if that was kind of the only one.
Okay. Um, uh, this may be a similar question. What do you think, based on everything you've seen so far in St. Petersburg? What did you think was very unique about these urban spaces that you saw today, as yesterday?
Yeah, what's very unique about these urban spaces? I mean, it's kind of, I don't know if there's really another kind of city of Baroque architecture built on canals, like a canal type city.
Right.
That's kind of unique, and it definitely, I think, works really well. going down the canals, walking down them or what have you. Like the color of the stucco and the style of the buildings. It's quite beautiful and effective. Um, I mean the parks.
I can go.
Oh, go ahead.
Let you think. The Summer Garden, because everything's been replaced in this restoration process, it doesn't look old. It's in the historic district, but you could tell pretty quickly that the busts had been newly replicated. The fountains were new. Like, it was clearly new, and there's even a touch I felt of some modern style or influence with kind of the rock base of all the fountains. At least in Europe, I feel like parks are kind of preserved maybe more than restored or given that modern twist. It's almost like the United States. It's like, oh, we have this park that we've let completely fall apart, so let's make it nice and new and put new stuff in it. You don't see that as much in
Right.
Europe, I don't think.
Um, some might say that St. Petersburg appears rather artificial, considering that it's not a very Russian-looking city in some aspects, and the fact that it was uh, built right on a swamp. Did you get that impression at all that it felt, I don't know, artificial at times? Maybe not as authentic as. I mean, I know you haven't been to Moscow yet, but based on maybe pictures you've seen of other Russian cities, have you?
It's hard to say since this is the first Russian city we've really been to.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if artificial is a word I would use for it because I mean I work on buildings for a living and I see a lot of buildings that are made out of much phonier looking materials than
Like
Right.
styrofoam.
that, like styrofoam, made to look like brick. Whereas here, it looks like most of the city is stucco over brick,
Mm-hmm.
which is to America that's an extremely traditional building style. You don't see that very much anymore. And the fact that so much of it is still of that traditional building material. So in that sense, I don't know if it feels inauthentic. I can see where the question would go in terms of this kind of more Baroque European style of architecture in Russia, and I mean give me a call in about 2 weeks after I've been around and seen a few more places. I might be able to answer the question a little
Right.
better.
Yeah, we heard St. Petersburg would be very European, and I can't disagree with that so far. The Cyrillic letters on buildings kind of reminds you, but
Right. Right.
yeah.
Okay. Um, uh, so far, has it overall been fairly easy to get around St. Petersburg? Have you had any difficulties finding places?
We walked everywhere,
That's good.
stuck close,
Yeah.
kept the big river in perspective
Okay.
where we're going.
Right.
It hasn't been difficult.
Yeah,
Well,
we
that's good.
we haven't ventured too far from the historic heart yet,
Uh-huh.
and the 2 days we've been here.
Right. Okay. Um. What do you think people will feel or learn by visiting the Summer Garden or the Field of Mars or the Cathedral on Spilled Blood,
Oh,
based on what
I can give something.
you thought of it?
Can I assume by people you mean Americans?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I'm like, suddenly I should qualify this. I think in the United States we're taught Russian history kind of from 1950s onwards.
Right.
We don't even hear much about Russia's impact on World War II and how they kind of were a big deal and who won the war. So I think, at least for Americans visiting St. Petersburg and some of these sites, especially the Church on Spilled Blood, it's a reminder that it's not a country that's got hundred centuries of history of communism. It's actually a country with centuries of history of a royal family and a great deal of wealth and a center of power, um, that has nothing to do with the history that we're kind of taught in school.
Okay. Interesting answer.
Yeah, it's hard to say. That's actually a pretty interesting point because I hadn't thought of it that way. But in terms of thinking, like let's say I were to go to the Summer Gardens without knowing much of anything about it. Um, yeah, I would. Let's say I knew some stuff about different styles of urban design and parks and so forth. I might be able to guess that this is kind of more of a European style park, but
Right.
I don't know how much of the interpretation of the site is readily apparent. Like in terms of, I mean, knowing that this was St. Peter's or not St. Peter, Peter's private garden, and he had a
Right.
menagerie there and the cafe and so forth. There wasn't really. I don't know how well. Well, there was signage. I don't know. I'd have to go back and like really think about that a little bit more. It was a lot easier because we were very nice to have a very private tour of it, so I didn't walk around reading signage to try to learn about the park.
Right.
But I do know that there was signage there. Field of Mars, on the other hand, I don't know how apparent it was that this was like a former military drill site. Um, I probably would not gather that just from walking through it or visiting it.
So, you think that if an American who, as soon as they thought of Russia, they just immediately thought only of Soviet communism, as soon as they walked into something like the Summer Garden or saw the cathedral, that they would be really, really shocked? Just totally surprised.
Would they be surprised? I think so. Yeah, I think so. You're taught.
But it's not like the big. Uh, it's not like they're probably used to seeing images of the big military parades on Red Square and those onion-shaped churches and so you think that would be kind of surprising to see something like the Summer Garden, different, which is so different from that.
Yes, because what we learn about communism, not only in Russia but in China and other countries as well, is
Right.
kind of a destruction of anything artistic. I was going to say beautiful, but that's kind of subjective. But anything artistic, and so a garden like that's so well structured with the statues and the fountains, it's clearly intended for, or kind of an artistic, lovely setting. Or a church that was full of, first of all, religion, which was also supposedly not appropriate in
Right.
communist regime, but then filled so beautifully with the mosaics and just the everything artistic that goes into building something like that, um, kind of flies directly in the face of the regime. I was surprised. I think I commented that so much of the city is still standing as it appears it would have been um, before the Soviet era, and then it wasn't torn down.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was kind of surprised that as much of the historic part of the city was extant as it is. I thought that it wouldn't be quite as much as the city would be the historic architecture, and I didn't realize that there would be such like this movement in the city for historic preservation.
Right, right. And one last question: did you ever feel like the cameras and the all the fences that covered a lot of the grass in the garden did that ever kind of, I don't know, ruin it at times because it felt like it was not threatening, but seeing all that security, just you got that sense that um, it's well, for one thing, at least it's very well protected. But did seeing those the gates or the cameras ever like seem threatening at all, or kind of ruin the uh, serenity of the garden?
As a woman, I never go in parks at night, so I thought it was actually kind of cool
Oh, okay.
that there was, security in the park. Never, no parks ever. But agree that there's like pretty well controlled, like crowd control with the gates and everything, the subways too. It's like the Russians got crowd control down.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't even notice the cameras. But I mean, I've seen other parks where they would do it just by having these tall hedges that they basically trim to be fences. So I didn't know if historically that's how the park was laid out, to where it was essentially just pathways and you weren't really allowed to deviate from the path, whether it be through fences or what have you. So
Right.
it was a little different. I didn't find it so off-putting.
Mhm.
That just it's just pretty different.
Right. Oh, and real quick, what did you think of the eternal flame in the field of Mars?
I think I missed it. No, I saw it. I saw it.
And just the way uh, I mean, as beautiful as the field of Mars was, and as open and free that it felt, it was full of so much tragedy, considering all the that it was a memorial to so many who died during the revolutions that Russia has experienced.
Go ahead.
Um, it's hard to say. We didn't really linger there. I mean, it's definitely a part of the past of Russia, and it's kind of a simple and somewhat somber way to recognize it. So I guess